You might have come across recaps of this manhwa before, but this video dives into the latest chapters that have been released recently. Before we delve into the story, let me give you a quick summary of it. Humanity faces extinction from dragons, but psykers, humans with supernatural powers, emerge to fight back, nearly ending the war. A prophecy warns of the dragon's return in 15 years, leading to the creation of Ark, a facility to train psychic children for the final war. Lee Han, a 10-year-old with exceptional leadership skills, is recruited to Ark, agreeing to join only if his siblings are cared for. At Ark, Han struggles to unlock his psychic abilities, faces bullying from Del, and learns a painful method to access his powers through self-inflicted injury.
The man stood in front of the protagonist, taking off his jacket. He asked him to answer the questions honestly. Looking at the protagonist, the man noted that he would get him to talk by any means. Han lowered his head. The guys were standing in the corridor and saying that the citadel should be cut out completely. The US military even had atomic bombs. Raising his hand, the guy noted that their comrades were still there. Frowning, he added that Kuro was still there. That guy was just a monster, and he was not sure that even nuclear bombs would take him. Canute silently listened to their conversation. Derek approached them and asked if they really thought Han had betrayed them. He asked them seriously how many of those present did not owe him their lives. The boys could not answer his question. Furious, Derek listened as they explained that they could never fully understand what was on his mind. The main character had been hiding from them for 3 years without giving them any news. Derek grabbed the guy and asked if he thought that just because he said that, it made it true. The boys tried to restrain him. Pointing his finger, the guy screamed that Derek should pull himself together, otherwise he would also go as a spy. Derek was furious. He tried to break free from the hold. The guy looked around. Looking at Canute, he asked why he was standing aside. Canute lowered his head and ignored Derek. The man was beating Han. Wiping sweat from his face, he noted that the protagonist was really tough. As they say, blood was dripping from the protagonist's mouth. The wounded Han asked to call his superiors because there was no point in talking now. The man kicked him, saying that the protagonist could not even think about doing something. Han fell from his chair. Lying on the floor, the protagonist said that the commander was acting strangely. He urgently needed to be detained and isolated. Trying to get up, the protagonist clarified whether Sergeant John could hear him. Looking at the screen, the soldier heard Han's words, that if he really planned the murder, he would not have been caught so easily. When he was in Alpha, he never failed a single mission. Watching what was happening, the deputy commander here, Colonel Tobias, noted that the protagonist, even in this situation, was trying to sow doubts. Nothing less should be expected from the Arca elite. John Red looked at him and said that Han was one of the most outstanding soldiers. Tobias noted, with a serious expression, that the Omega also stood out from the others, so there was no need to mix personal feelings into it. They saw the man in front of Han declare that he would pull out his nails one by one if he did not answer what was asked. Frowning, John thought that, knowing the protagonist, he could probably hold out for a while longer. Now was not the time to stand around and wait idly. He looked at the projection. Smoking a cigar, John thought that, as expected, according to the camera recording, they could not understand anything. Going out into the corridor, the guy said that he was still tormented by doubts. Moving on, John noted that Han was extremely meticulous. This was not his style at all, and if he really wanted to, the commander would already be dead. Octo met him and asked if the protagonist was serious about being a spy. He cried out, with a dumbfounded look, that this could not be. The furious scientist said that this was all. Maybe the others didn't know, but he knew Han hadn't changed a bit in 3 years. Standing in front of John, Octo said that people lie, but neither the equipment nor Han could lie. The guy walked away, saying that they would talk later. John suddenly stopped. His face was serious. He turned around and addressed Octo. Some time later, John was standing in front of Jürgen Teller's door. His gaze fell on the red lamp. He looked at it intently. The old man was sitting on the chair. His gaze was empty. John stood in front of him and said that he trusted the commander. He turned the failed Ark project into a success. Looking at Jürgen, John emphasized the fact that superhumans should first be people, and only then weapons. That's what he believed in. Thanks to him, guys like Omega no longer appeared. They looked at each other. John smirked and said that Chief of Staff Alexander was an incredible man. He now understands, having been in his shoes. Frowning, John stated that he was not fit for this position. Now he wants to listen to his feelings, not logic. Standing in front of Jurgen, John noted that he trusted Han just as much as he trusted him. The scientists ran down the hallway. Octo ran next to the guys. Looking at his subordinates, he asked if the recording was ready to replace the recordings from the surveillance console. The man stood in front of the protagonist. The protagonist's nails were lying on the floor. Frowning, the soldier thought that this was already the 7th nail in a row, and he didn't even squeak the first time he saw such a guy. Turning around, the man heard a voice that asked to take a short break. Holding the pliers in front of him, the soldier said that they would see each other again soon. He walked away from the protagonist. Han lowered his head and thought that they wouldn't be able to kill him anyway, but he couldn't sit like that. Considering the commander's condition, the Ark could fall at any moment. The problem was different. He didn't know how to convince the others, and then wondered if there was anyone there who trusted him more than the commander. Octo removed the mask from Han's face. The protagonist was shocked by what he saw. The stunned scientist cried out that there was no time. First, they needed to get out of there. The guys ran out of the interrogation room. Octo moved next to the protagonist, and said that they probably already welded the hangar doors tight, and he noted that the Terranode would land in 5 minutes. Octo let out deep breaths, cried out that the protagonist should open the airlock and escape. Han replied, "If say, that it's not that simple." Smiling, the scientist stated not to worry, because his brilliant servant had already come up with something. Dumbfounded, Han asked about the psycho frame. Running down the hallway, Octo shouted that there were 4 minutes left, and they were almost there. The man leaned over to the guy. Picking up the drill, he said that everything was ready. The protagonist looked at the hand and asked if it was ready for work, because it looked like a rather crude assembly. The scientist stood in front of him and told him that it was made in a hurry, but there was no need to worry. He brought it to mind. It is called Old Man. He combined the parts of the 1st and 2nd generations. You could say that it is generation 1.5. Octo looked at Han and said that the data says that it is ready for battle, but theory always diverges from practice in some way. But he will definitely cope with everything. Han looked at the screen and replied that the final test will be held in a real battle. Picking up the spear, the man said that there are 2 minutes left. The protagonist took the weapon, thinking about the fact that people are ready to help him without thinking about the risks. Why go so far? Smiling, the guy thought that there was no point in asking questions and thanked Octo. The scientist adjusted his glasses with a smile. Looking at the lamps, he said that he had outlined an escape route. Let him get out now. The protagonist pushed off the ground, hearing that he had a message from Sergeant John. Han ran down the corridor and listened to what the man said. As if they were even, he said that he would understand what he was talking about. The guy pointed his hand forward and said that he was there. It was necessary to stop him. The protagonist jumped above the guys. The crowd looked at him in surprise. The protagonist landed on his hunches, listening to everyone marvel at the tele-armor. The guys looked after him and asked where he got it from. Han smiled, thinking that he expected nothing less from Octo. After all, it only took a few days to calibrate. The guys pounded on the door and asked who welded it shut. Was there a spy inside? Canute stood at the back of the crowd. He gritted his teeth in displeasure and thought about Octo. The protagonist ran down the hallway. The guy ran to the exit. Frowning, Han thought about the fact that there were 2 high-speed ships, but which one was it? He scanned the ship and decided what it was. A flash appeared behind him. Canute swung his spear. The protagonist jumped back on his hunches. The protagonist extended his hand. Frowning, he called out to his opponent. Canute stood in front of him and asked if he was really running away right after the assassination failed. He looked at him seriously and said that he did not expect this from him and was disappointed. Han looked down and replied that it did not matter what he said, now he would not believe him. The passage to the sea was opening. Canute stood between the ships and said that, of course, it was so. If he wanted to get out of here, he would have to defeat him. The protagonist's eyes lit up, and he replied that they would settle this dispute. The guy opened his mouth wide and shouted that even if he lost, the fault would definitely not be on the body armor. He swung his spear. The protagonist parried the blow. The protagonist dug his feet into the floor. Gritting his teeth, Han thought that it seemed that the idea of exterminating 2 hives was not a bluff at all. If they worked together, they could easily destroy any hive. The guy dodged the attack. Jumping over the enemy, he thought about getting an advantage in speed. Canute clenched his fist. The guy quickly ran forward. The protagonist flew back. Han extended his hand. The protagonist broke with his hand. Swinging his fist, Canute shouted that he would not defeat him with such a car. He hit the guy in the stomach. The protagonist cried out in pain. The enemy lifted him into the air. Canute pressed Han to the ground. Frowning, he asked why he was betraying him. A bead of sweat ran down the guy's cheek. The protagonist clenched his fist and thought that he would deal with him at once with an upwave, but he would definitely die. This cannot be allowed. Canute hit him with his fist and shouted to surrender. The guy furiously beat his opponent. Grinning, the protagonist thought about the fact that one after another, the systems were failing. What should he do? He looked in surprise. The protagonist looked at the suit diagram and wondered what was on his left hand. The guy remembered Octo being taken aback and asking him why he was so stubborn. He imagined raising his fist and saying that one spear was not enough, he needed a second weapon. Han imagined pointing to his hand and asking for it to extend from his hand. Smiling, the guy thought that he was grateful to Octo, but next time he should at least warn him in advance. The protagonist raised his trembling hand. He bent his wrist. Canute swung his fist. The protagonist frowned. With a cry, the fist was approaching his face. Han hit his opponent on the helmet. Smiling, Canute said that he couldn't kill him like that, he wouldn't even lose consciousness. The guy looked at him seriously and replied that he knew, but he wasn't sure about the latter. The sword began to spark. The protagonist plunged the sword into the helmet. It pierced the opponent through and through. Numerous lightning bolts appeared. The protagonist stood in front of the enemy. Han walked past him. The guy turned around and said that Canute should just get some sleep. He stood in front of the ship and thought that he needed to hurry. The rival stood behind him. The protagonist turned around worriedly. Canute grabbed the guy. The protagonist looked at the glow, thinking that this couldn't be happening. He should have passed out. Frowning, Han wondered if he was still moving by sheer willpower. Canute clenched his teeth in anger. He left a green trail behind him. The guy was holding the protagonist in his arms. Canute flew into the sky. The soldier was holding his friend back. The protagonist bared his teeth. They were flying toward the ship. The guys were falling, screaming. There was an explosion on the ship. The military watched through the screen and said that they had fallen. The protagonist landed on his knee. Han put his hand to his chest. He was walking away from his friend. The guy was holding his stomach. The protagonist froze in surprise. Newt's suit caught fire. The protagonist frowned and called his friend. He quickly ran towards the explosion. Han was trying to take off his suit. The guy threw his head back with a scream. The protagonist threw away parts of the equipment. He was disassembling the burning suit. Han was screaming in panic. The protagonist was getting Canute out of the fire. Meanwhile, the soldiers were running down the hallway. The man was banging on the table and shouting at them to move and grab Han. The guy looked at him tensely. Turning around at the fire, he thought that something was wrong. The protagonist was trying to take off his helmet. The soldiers pointed their machine guns and ordered him not to move. He was under escort. The protagonist looked at them worriedly and said that the small reactor was behaving abnormally. They could all die if they were careless. Newt's helmet was sparking. The soldiers lowered their weapons. The ship was cutting through the waves. It was sailing on the sea. The vessel was moving forward rapidly. Han was pulling on a part of the suit. The guy screamed furiously. The protagonist threw his helmet into the sky. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist thought about what his actions would show, who he really was. The part left a bright trace behind it. The protagonist stretched his hand into the sky. Part of the suit began to glow. There was an explosion in the sky. The ship began to collapse. The guy flew back. Dark smoke filled the sky. Tobias watched in surprise and asked why. John stood behind and said that whatever the reason, Han saved Terranode, and that was a fact. Frowning, he said that they needed to take the commander into custody, start all over again, and from scratch try to figure out who was lying. Canute jumped up in panic. Beads of sweat were running down his face. The guy was sitting in a hospital ward. He was clutching a blanket. Canute bared his teeth furiously. The guy ran into the room. Bending down, he asked if Han was alive. The soldier looked at the screen with his friend and asked how he was. John looked at him seriously and replied that it would be decided tonight. Hitting the table, Canute thought about why this was happening. The guy watched as Han lay in a coma. He looked at him pitifully. Canute looked at the bandaged limb. The main character was lying on the bed. The guy was leaning his hands on the table. He fell to his knees. Canute was sitting in front of the screen with his head down. The guy was worried about what he had done. Han had risked his life again to save everyone. Canute was crying and asking why he hadn't trusted him. Tobias was sitting at the table, wondering if the commander could be a traitor. He clasped his hands together and thought that if he was harsh with him, and he was innocent, then he himself would not be spared trouble. The man looked at the screen in the table. Tobias pressed a button and asked what was going on. He looked and listened seriously to Canute going to the commander's room. They would sound the alarm immediately. Smiling, the man asked to wait. Tobias pressed the button and thought that it was convenient. Someone decided to expose themselves to the blow. If the commander was not a traitor, they would blame it on Canute. He put his hand on the table and said that they saw nothing. The guy opened the doors. In front of him sat an old man on a chair. Canute looked seriously and told the commander to get up. The guy pointed a gun at him. Lowering his head, Jürgen muttered something. Canute held the weapon, saying that it was enough. To find out who the traitor was, he decided to believe his friend. The guy pulled the trigger. The old man continued to mutter. The soldier grinned. Frowning, he shouted that the commander should say something already. Canute clenched his teeth, listening to the old man ask if he felt guilty, because the responsibility was on him. The guy looked surprised. Jürgen looked up, smiling. He asked what answer he expected from him. Canute aimed his gun and asked why he had made Han out to be a traitor. The old man smiled and answered that he only believed what he wanted to believe. He sat in front of the guy and said that he had called the protagonist a traitor himself, and now, drowning in guilt, he had decided to consider him one. Canute glared at him and shouted at him to shut his mouth. The commander looked at him and said that he would brand him evil, punish him, and find redemption. But now he even doubted Han. Otherwise, he would have helped him from the very beginning. The guy began to cry and asked him to shut up before he killed him. Jürgen clenched his teeth angrily and said that this was his limit. An energy network appeared around them. Grinning, the guy wondered what it was, whether it was the commander's ability. The old man smiled maliciously and said that he was reckless. Compared to Han, he did not even pose any danger. Canute looked at him in fear and wondered what kind of man he was, if he was even a man. The commander smiled creepily. Mana surrounded his face. The old man grinned and said that they were Jürgen Teller. The guy looked at his hands and thought that his body was moving on its own. The commander looked at the gun furiously and said that it wouldn't be so bad to leave everything a mystery as it was. Gritting his teeth, Canute thought that he had proof that the commander had betrayed them. He couldn't finish him off here. Jürgen frowned and told him to shoot, because he had come to kill him. The guy surrounded himself with mana and screamed that he dared not underestimate him. He grabbed the hand with the gun. The weapon was pointed at his temple. The guy shot himself. Canute pulled the hand with the gun away. Grinning, he asked if Jürgen thought he was cooler, adding that his body belonged only to him. The commander looked at him in shock. The guy had punched him in the stomach. The old man's mouth dropped open in pain. Canute stood over the enemy and said that he would take responsibility for his mistakes. The soldiers burst into the room and ordered him to stand. The guy raised his hands and said that the commander was still alive, although he could hardly still hold that rank. John sat opposite Tobias and said that there was no camera footage for that period. Had no one seen Canute heading there? Tobias brought his cup to his lips and replied that there had been a malfunction, and that they were fixing it at that moment. That was the coincidence. The sergeant, John, smiled and said that it was truly an amazing coincidence. Tobias sat at the table and said that the commander had clearly gone crazy. They hadn't lasted long with a lunatic at the helm. Frowning, John replied that the deputy commander should watch his words. Tobias calmly drank his coffee. The sergeant held out his hand and said that it was true. Something else had mixed into his mind, but it was too early to call him a traitor. Tobias looked at the reflection in the cup and said that he had shown enough. The commander was hostile to people. He put his fist on the table and asked if the sergeant really wanted to have a conversation with him. Frowning, John replied that from now on, Jürgen was his responsibility. The scene shifted to the citadel. Inside a quiet, dimly lit chamber, Kuro sat alone in a meditative yoga position, eyes closed in deep focus. Before him floated a dragon's heart, pulsing faintly with psychic energy. He was steadily drawing power from it, his body surrounded by a faint aura that shimmered in sync with the heart's pulses. After some time, as the energy from the heart began to diminish, Kuro extended his hand. With a controlled breath, he activated his telekinesis, pulling the heart toward himself. The heart hovered for a brief moment before, with a flash of motion, it shot directly into his chest. Kuro gritted his teeth, staggering slightly as his body reacted violently to the foreign energy. After a tense moment of struggle, his breathing steadied. The fusion was successful. He stood, his presence now radiating greater intensity than before. At the room's exit stood Omega-1, waiting with a folded uniform in hand. He smiled as Kuro approached. "We did it, Kuro," Omega-1 said warmly. "This time, it didn't even take 10 minutes. The absorption rate's getting faster." Kuro took the shirt from him and began putting it on. "That doesn't matter," he replied curtly. "Any updates from Li-Han?" Omega-1 tilted his head. "Not yet. Want me to check?" "No," Kuro said. "It's fine. Li-Han is strong." For a moment, Omega-1 remained silent. Then he spoke with a more serious tone. "Right now you're much stronger. Don't downplay yourself, and don't overestimate Han." Kuro looked at him, expression unreadable. "Han doesn't need to be a psyker to be strong. Without psychic powers, I'm just another face in the crowd." He turned away and started walking. "I'm tired. I just want to rest today." But behind that calm exterior, a storm brewed. "I won't let myself be used by you again, Omega-1." Meanwhile, back at Citadel, Silence quietly opened the door to her room, only to sigh deeply the moment she stepped in. There standing, in front smile, was Yanni. "Welcome back, Silence. I've been waiting forever," Yanni said brightly. Without a word, Silence moved swiftly, grabbed Yanni by the arm, and tossed her out of the room. Yanni landed with a thud, rubbing her back as her eyes welled up. "That's so mean," she whimpered. Silence didn't respond verbally. Instead, she scribbled something on a note and held it up. "Get lost." Then she slammed the door shut. From behind the door, she thought, she doesn't seem dangerous, but this is getting annoying. Every single day? Seriously? Just then, a faint pop sound echoed. Yanni had teleported directly behind her. "Do you really think I come here just because I've got nothing better to do?" Yanni asked with a tired sigh. Silence's hand curled into a tight fist in frustration. "If you were a guy," she thought, "I'd have already knocked you out." She turned around and walked toward her. Yanni's eyes widened slightly. "Wait, you're not really going to hit me, are you?" she said nervously. "I mean, do you even have a spot to hit?" Silence didn't hesitate. She focused her energy into a single finger, then flicked her squarely on the forehead dot. Thwack! Yanni let out a shriek of pain that echoed through the corridor dot. "Ow! That hurt more than a punch!" she cried. Elsewhere, in the deep underwater facility of the submarines, Li-Han remained unconscious in the care unit, hooked up to various monitors and IVs. John Red stood beside the medical team, concern etched into his face. "How's he doing?" he asked the lead doctor. "He's stabilized," the doctor replied. "He's past the critical stage." John nodded in relief. "Good. That's a relief." Inside Han's mind, however, a nightmare unfolded. He found himself standing in the depths of a vast, pitch-black cave. Its walls were unnaturally smooth, clearly man-made. "Where am I?" he thought. "This place, someone built it. As he advanced deeper, he came upon a massive, sealed door. Suddenly, red alarms flared, casting harsh crimson light across the cave. The door shuddered, creaking open with a thunderous sound. Han's eyes widened in shock as he caught sight of what lay beyond. That shock jolted him back into consciousness. His eyes fluttered open. The sterile white of the care unit greeted him. As he tried to move, he noticed his left arm, gone. John quickly approached, noticing he'd woken up. "You're awake. How's your body?" "Even as a lie," Han muttered hoarsely. "I can't say I'm fine." John chuckled dryly. "Even when fighting a dragon, I never got hurt like this. People, turns out, are scarier than dragons." "At least I only lost an arm," Han said grimly. "I'll need a prosthetic." John tapped his metallic leg. "Welcome to the world of cyborgs." Han focused. "What's the situation?" John exhaled slowly. "If they try to brand you a traitor, it's going to blow up. Out of 34 enhanced soldiers, 18 submitted formal petitions. They're demanding a reinvestigation. They want the truth." "Did you really plan things this far ahead?" Han was silent for a moment before answering. "Even if I didn't, I wouldn't have let them all die. My reason for fighting, it's not for revenge. It's to protect someone. Always has been." John gave a short nod. That's a good answer, Han. Just then, a soft beep came from a nearby terminal. Han turned his head and saw John answering a call. He glanced back and smiled. Everyone just heard what you said, John told him. They found it moving. Han narrowed his eyes. Your political instincts have gotten sharper. This'll sway a lot of the neutrals to your side, John replied. But more importantly, I'm not in great shape. I need your advice. Han paused, then said quietly, You're planning to confront the commander. A few days later, Li Han finally emerged from the care unit, leaning on a walking stick for support. His steps were slow, each movement deliberate. The sterile white corridors of the submarine base greeted him with cold silence, but at the end of the hall, John Red was already waiting. John turned to him with a serious expression. You must still be in pain. I'm sorry, but I need you. Han offered a faint nod, his eyes calm despite the fatigue weighing on him. I understand. What happened to Canute? John replied. He turned himself in. Said he needed time to reflect, so he's currently in voluntary solitary confinement. Han's gaze dropped slightly. I see. That makes sense. At that moment, two psykers approached from down the hall. One of them was Derek, walking with a quiet purpose. As they came to a stop beside John, the deputy chief of staff looked at the group and nodded. Then let's go, he said. Elsewhere, Jürgen Teller sat in a private room, enjoying a hot meal. He ate slowly, savoring every bite like a man without a care in the world. The door slid open, and John entered with Han and the two psykers in tow. Jürgen glanced up mid-bite. Delicious, he commented, chewing thoughtfully. John approached cautiously. Are you Commander Jürgen Teller? Jürgen set down his utensils, dabbed his mouth with a cloth, and looked at John with a faint smirk. Who else would I be, Deputy Chief of Staff? If it were Alexander asking me that, perhaps we'd already be on the same wavelength. John hesitated at the mention of Alexander. The name hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, Han stepped forward. John! Give me a moment. John stepped aside without question. Han raised his hand toward Jürgen and activated his psychic ability. A subtle wave of invisible force passed between them. Jürgen's eyes widened in surprise. The psyker beside Han frowned, confused. What is he doing? Jürgen looked down at his own hands. I can't use my psychic powers. Realization dawned on John and the psyker at once. Han possessed anti-psychic capabilities. Even Jürgen looked stunned. Sweat began to bead on Han's brow from the effort. He turned to John. Whatever is wrong with the commander, it doesn't seem tied to psychic influence. Jürgen chuckled softly. You really do have the potential to end this war, Han. I acknowledge that. The two psykers stiffened. That kind of praise, from Jürgen, was rare. They exchanged uneasy glances. Could Li Han really end the war? Then Jürgen's tone shifted. A chilling smile crept across his face. But tell me, can we really trust Silver's words? We're placing our hope in a dragon. What if this is all a trap? What if Silver simply wants to wipe out the other hives and crown himself king of a dying species? Or worse, maybe he's baiting what's left of humanity into the open, just to annihilate them. Han remained silent, unfazed. John turned to the psykers. Everyone except Han, leave us. Yes, sir. They both responded and promptly exited the room. John watched them go, then turned back to Jürgen. It's not his psychic strength that's dangerous, it's his presence. That aura, oppressive, inhuman. This man isn't the commander anymore. He feels like a demon. Jürgen leaned back, his eyes narrowed with memory. This reminds me of the Oracle. You never stopped feeling guilty. Sometimes I wonder, do you wish we had all died back then? Together? John clenched his fists and answered through grit teeth. Maybe. Jürgen smiled coldly. You're weak, John. If Alexander were still here, Ark wouldn't have fallen apart the way it did. Later, Han and John exited the room in silence. They walked side by side, their steps echoing down the corridor. When Alexander died, Han finally said, Jürgen died with him. John nodded solemnly. We made the mistake of thinking Jürgen was a superhuman. We believed he could endure anything, that he'd carry Ark no matter the cost. Han glanced at him. But in the end, he was just a man. A man who broke. And once he lost hope for humanity's future, he gave in to something darker, became something else. I underestimated Alexander, John admitted. If he'd been here, maybe things would have turned out differently. What now? Han asked. John exhaled deeply. A leader must be more than human. They have to embody strength, even when they're breaking inside. Officially, we'll say the commander was manipulated by Spectre. That he never abandoned Ark, never gave up on humanity. That's the story we'll tell. He paused. Jurgen's been imprisoned in the deepest cell of Terranode. The officers who know the truth, they don't call him commander anymore. They call him demon. But even demons have their uses. His knowledge is still valuable to Arkansas. Sometime later, inside Octolab, Han stood in front of a training module, testing out a new prosthetic arm. With intense focus, he controlled the mechanical limb entirely through psychokinesis, performing delicate movements and even simulating combat gestures. From the side, Octo watched, arms crossed. Seriously? You're controlling a prosthetic purely through psychic power? You think you can actually fight like that? Han's gaze remained steady. I can. I've seen someone do it before. Simon, if you could do it, so can I. He stepped out of the lab, deep in thought. Right now, all I can do is focus on rehabilitation. As he passed through the sliding doors, he stopped. Canute stood outside, waiting for him. A brief silence stretched between them as they stared at each other. Han finally broke it. What's going on? Canute looked down. Hit me. Han blinked. Why would I do that? Because I was wrong, Canute said firmly. Hit me until you feel better. I won't activate my healing factor until the pain fades. It's the only way I can apologize. Han let out a tired sigh. There's nothing I gain by hitting you. Only thing that'll hurt is my hand. I'm sorry, Canute said, his voice trembling. I should have trusted you. At the very least, I should have believed in you. Han nodded slowly. It'd be a lie to say I didn't resent you. But we have to move forward. Forget the small things. Why do you think I saved you? Canute stared. Han continued. Because I didn't hate you enough to want you dead. Relief flooded Canute's expression. Overcome with emotion, he moved forward to hug Han. But before he could embrace him, Han drove a sudden, powerful punch straight into Canute's gut. Canute gasped, collapsing to the ground, clutching his stomach in pain. You said you wouldn't hit me, he groaned. Han gave a small smile. Yeah, well, I figured one punch might help me feel a little better after all. Sometime later, in the strategy meeting room at Terranode, Han stood before a polished table of senior brass, Deputy Commander Colonel Tobias, Deputy Chief of Staff John, and several high-ranking officers from ARC's command. In his hand, he held the spear gifted to him by the Silver Dragon, its surface etched with faint, ancient patterns that shimmered subtly under the room's lighting. He looked them in the eye and declared, To stop the resurrection, we'll need the power of the Silver Hive. Colonel Tobias narrowed his eyes, pointing to the spear. So the plan is, locate the current Silver Hive, then pierce it with that weapon. There's no concrete proof this will work, but we've chosen to trust your word. John folded his arms and added, But locating the current Silver Hive won't be easy. Even with our surveillance network, there's no telling when, or if, we'll find it. Han's response was calm, almost calculated. Then we need to integrate Citadel's intelligence network into ours. That suggestion was met with a tense silence. The air in the room felt heavier. Colonel Tobias broke the quiet, his voice skeptical. Even if we proposed that, do you think Citadel would agree? They've never been willing to join forces with Arkansas. They will, Han said. If I go personally, they'll listen. Citadel may be prideful, but they're not suicidal. They understand what's at stake. Mutual destruction won't appeal to them. Later, in Colonel Tobias's private office, Tobias leaned against his desk and handed Han a small badge. Congratulations on your commission, Ensign Lee Han. As of today, you're formally assigned to the U.S. Navy Intelligence Division. Han raised an eyebrow, glancing down at the insignia. But I'm not even an American citizen. Are you really authorized to hand this out so freely? Tobias gave a wry smile. Does citizenship matter at this point? The title is ceremonial, it's more about optics than legality. Better to give you an official standing than let you remain unaffiliated. We'll keep Silver's spear secured here. You'll lead the diplomatic mission to Citadel. Han gave a short nod. Understood. He turned to leave without another word. As he watched Han exit, Tobias mused silently. He's meticulous, a perfectionist even. But there's something unexpectedly soft-hearted about him. Tying him to an official post might be the only way to keep him tethered. Meanwhile, Han thought to himself, not bad. With this title, I'll have more freedom to operate independently of Ark's chains. Scene shift to Citadel cafeteria. Yanni was slurping a bowl of noodles with gusto, sitting across from Silence, who watched her with arms crossed and an unmistakably annoyed expression. Silence's stare was sharp, cutting through the noise of the bustling cafeteria. Yanni pointed accusingly to her messy bangs, grumbling. Seriously? You messed up a lady's hair. That's a high crime. Be thankful I'm letting it slide because we're eating together. Silence didn't speak. Instead, she scribbled on a small notepad and held it up. Yanni squinted at it. Yeah, I get it. Didn't expect you to actually faint, Silence thought silently to herself. So you're not a psyker with physical enhancements, after all. Despite everything, watching Yanni eat so cheerfully put a slight crack in Silence's cold demeanor. She scribbled another note and passed it across the table. Do you like living in Citadel? Yanni paused, reading it. Then she looked up and smiled warmly. Does it seem like I don't? Of course I do. We've got a super psyker commander, psycho frames everywhere. It's the safest place in the world. Honestly. She twirled her noodles. I'd be fine if we didn't win the war. Just maintaining this life is enough. Before I came here, I never even thought about what happiness meant. Just then, her wristwatch chimed. Work time, she said brightly, standing up and gathering her tray. Another day, another shift. I'll head out first, Lady Silence. Silence didn't reply. She only watched as Yanni left the cafeteria, the noise swallowing her up. Scene shift to late night, in a crumbling city en route to Citadel. Amid the ruins of a once thriving metropolis, now reduced to twisted steel and cracked concrete, Han and 3 Arc psykers moved stealthily under the glow of a bright, haunting moon. The skyline was jagged with collapsed buildings, casting long shadows in the pale light. Han's thoughts ran quietly beneath his calm expression. To reach the Citadel, we'll need Yanni's help. If we don't get to the next jump point before sunrise, we'll miss the window. Eventually, the group stopped to rest. The night air was cold and brittle. One psyker lit a cigarette, exhaling a stream of smoke as he gazed at the sky. The moon's really bright tonight. Han remained vigilant, scanning the surroundings while kneeling to check a nearby scanner. A few minutes later, he stood and said, Let's move. The group fell into formation and resumed their advance through the wreckage. But just as they turned into a narrow alley, one of the psykers halted abruptly. His voice was tense. Contact, up high! Monster! Werewolf! They all turned in unison, eyes tracing the movement of a creature bounding along the side of a shattered building. It was fast, inhumanly fast, and within seconds it had disappeared onto a rooftop. They raised their weapons, preparing to fire. But then they saw more. Dozens of werewolves, encircling them from the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly. Form up! Han barked, and the group shifted into a defensive stance. But the attack came too fast. 2 psykers were struck down in an instant, their bodies crumpling with no visible source of impact. The remaining soldiers turned in every direction, weapons shaking in their hands, confusion and panic rising. What's happening? Where is the enemy? But Han understood. He sprinted across the alley and shoved one of the soldiers away from his position, diving in to cover himself. In one fluid motion, he opened fire on what appeared to be thin air. Sparks erupted in midair. His bullets had struck something. A cloaked figure shimmered into visibility, the stealth field shorting out from the impact. An armored Ellis Knight emerged, the glint of metal visible beneath its long cloak. Han's eyes widened in shock. A Ellis Knight? Here? The enemy was far more dangerous than he'd anticipated. Scene transitioned to inside the Citadel. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Citadel's residential block. Yanni stood before the mirror in her standard-issue uniform, adjusting her collar with a faint hum on her lips. With a soft smile, she tied her hair into a short ponytail and gave herself a final glance. All right, she said to no one in particular, slapping her cheek slightly for energy. Another day, another shift. Let's head out. She stepped out briskly, the metallic halls humming faintly beneath her boots. Her steps echoed with routine familiarity as she made her way toward the monitor room. She arrived exactly on time, checking her wristwatch. Inside, senior psykers monitoring stations, eyes flickering over data streams and surveillance grids. Yanni reporting in. She called out cheerfully, giving a short salute. Without hesitation, Yanni used her psyker ability teleported away. A shimmer of light surrounded her, and in the next instant, she vanished. The world reassembled around her in a flash of disorientation. She landed on a field surrounded by ruins, but the sharp tang in the air made her instincts flare. Blood, she realized. Fresh. Yanni instantly dropped to a crouch, unslinging her sidearm and pressing her back against a nearby chunk of broken concrete. Her senses sharpened. What the hell happened here? This zone was supposed to be secure. Meanwhile, a short distance away, gunfire rang out. Han was sprinting through the debris-littered terrain, his breath sharp, each shot from his sidearm dropping a werewolf that got too close. But the sheer number of them was overwhelming. Their snarls echoed as they pursued him like a pack of starving beasts. From her position, Yanni caught sight of him, her eyes widening. Senior Han? He looked up mid-run, somehow sensing her presence. Don't get closer! He shouted, breath ragged. There's a cloaked enemy, an Ellis Knight. One of them's invisible. Yanni froze, heart pounding. He knew I was here. Then the gravity of his words hit her. An Ellis Knight? There's no way I can handle one of those. Her thoughts turned grim. If Han falls, I'll have no choice but to run. I won't survive that kind of fight. Han, meanwhile, continued his evasive maneuvers, cursing under his breath. Damn that bastard! It's targeting our reload windows. That's how the others were taken out. The werewolves closed in from all directions. One lunged, Han shot at midair. Another slashed at him, but he ducked, pivoted, and fired at a second. Yet even as he moved, one last werewolf dropped from above with a shriek, jaws wide. In a split-second reaction, Han jammed the barrel of his gun into its mouth and pulled the trigger. The beast's skull burst, sending blood and bone flying. But before he could breathe, Yanni's voice rang out. Behind you! Han twisted, just in time to glimpse a shimmer of steel and light, the Ellis Knight, uncloaking as it brought its blade down. Han barely raised his prosthetic left arm in time, the blade crashing against reinforced alloy. Sparks flew. Gritting his teeth, Han fired point-blank into the knight's face. The shot pierced one of its eyes, causing the armored figure to reel back, blood streaking its helmet. Han pushed off the ground, rolling to his feet. Sorry, he muttered with a smirk. Fake out. Yanni ran over breathless. Are you okay? Before Han could respond, the Ellis Knight turned and noticed her. Han's eyes widened. No! But the knight vanished again, a blur of speed and malice. In an instant, it reappeared behind Yanni, blade raised once more. Yanni, duck! Han roared. She didn't hesitate. Instinct took over, and she dropped low. The knight's blade sliced cleanly through empty air, shaving off a lock of her hair. But before the knight could recover, a dagger, crackling with psychic energy, whipped through the air, hurled with deadly precision by Han. The blade buried itself in the knight's head, piercing through the helm with a flash of force. The Ellis Knight froze, then fell like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The battlefield went still. Both Han and Yanni remained frozen for a moment, hearts pounding. Then, slowly, they both exhaled, the tension bleeding from their shoulders. Too close. Scene transitioned to inside Citadel, Omega-1's office. The metallic doors slid open with a hiss as Han stepped inside. Omega-1, leader of Citadel's command psykers, stood by the window, hands behind his back. Well, look who made it back in one piece, Omega-1 said without turning. Did you enjoy your little trip down memory lane, Alpha? Han raised his prosthetic arm. Not really. At that, Omega-1 turned with a smirk. Looks like you paid a price. Han's expression darkened. I'm here on ARC's behalf. They've agreed to open cooperation. Assuming Citadel is willing. Omega-1's eyes narrowed. Those ARC bastards? You're serious? Han nodded. Omega-1 sighed in disbelief. So what? Are you suggesting we leap straight into a full-scale alliance? Joint operations? Han met his gaze evenly. Ending this war, it has to go through Arkansas. A flicker of anger broke across Omega-1's face. What? As per the agreement finalized during the negotiations between ARC and Citadel, both sides chose a remote, solitary church overlooking the sea as the location for their next meeting. Citadel military trucks rumbled up the cliffside road, halting outside the crumbling church. With a heavy thud, the reinforced doors creaked open, and Omega-1 stepped inside, flanked by Citadel's psykers in full combat gear. Inside, key figures from ARC were already present. Among them were John Red, Octo, and Deputy Commander Colonel Tobias. They stood near the altar, the cold sea breeze drifting through shattered stained glass. Omega-1's eyes scanned the room. Standing near the pews were Silence, Han, Kuro, and 3 more Citadel-aligned psychic soldiers. Colonel Tobias narrowed his eyes and spoke sharply. "You've brought 7 people. We agreed to a maximum of 5 each." Omega-1 smirked faintly and shrugged. He casually pointed toward Han and Silence. "Aren't these 2 technically still ARC personnel? Alpha's a U.S. Navy officer, and Silence, well, deserter or not, he's still under ARC's registry." John Red stepped forward, his voice calm but steady. "It's been a long time, Silence. And you too, Kuro." Kuro gave a polite bow. But John observed him closely, noting the suffocating psychic pressure emanating from him. So the rumors were true. He's absorbing cores. Even with 3 psycho frames stationed outside, I doubt we can overpower him now. John gave a subtle glance to Colonel Tobias. Tobias caught it and frowned, reading the implication clearly. "You're saying Citadel is stronger?" Still, he composed himself and gestured toward the pews. "Let's sit and talk." A short while later, the negotiating table was set. On Han's left sat Citadel's representatives, Kuro and Omega-1. On his right were ARC's officials, John and Colonel Tobias. Tensions quickly rose. Colonel Tobias slammed his hand on the table, voice raised. "This is nonsense. We're willing to supply psycho frames, but the core technology is non-negotiable." Omega-1 remained unfazed. He smiled coolly. "Then this meeting is a waste of time. If you're willing to choose mutual destruction over cooperation, then history will mock your pride. And if you lose, well, there won't be a history to remember you. Train harder with that shining spear of yours. If you fall, we'll just collect it from your corpse and put it to good use." Tobias clenched his jaw in frustration, lips twitching in fury. But before he could retort, John raised a hand and cut in smoothly. "We'll provide it." Tobias turned sharply toward him. "What are you saying?" John replied grimly. "Even if psycho frames become a long-term threat, they're still preferable to dragons. If we fall here, Tobias, everything ends." Omega-1 added flatly. "And Citadel will be recognized as an independent nation after the war." Tobias scoffed. "A nation led by psykers? Where are your citizens? Where's your land?" Omega-1 replied without hesitation. "After the war, wherever we plant our flag first, that will be our land. And those who seek safety will become our people." Tobias cursed under his breath, visibly shaken. By the time the meeting concluded, night had fallen over the sea. Outside the church, Tobias lit a cigarette and exhaled deeply, muttering curses over the outcome. "What am I even supposed to report to the higher-ups?" he asked bitterly. John stared out toward the dark horizon. "This deal was disadvantageous for us from the beginning." Han, standing nearby, added, "At least Citadel's demands were something we anticipated. Omega-1 would rather drag everyone into mutual destruction than let go of his goal." John turned toward Han, a rare trace of approval in his voice. "You really pulled this off, Li Han. The real challenge begins now, but well done." Han's expression turned serious as he recalled a key moment from the negotiation. In a quiet side conversation, Omega-1 had leaned in and said firmly, "Swear to me, Alpha. One thing. You won't use your power on Kuro." Han responded, voice steady. "I'll make you one promise. If ARC betrays Citadel first, I'll fight for Citadel. I'll give you everything I've got." Kuro, standing beside them, gave a quiet smile. "That's enough. I'm not angry. If my power brings balance and things go smoothly, I'm satisfied. I want this war to end quickly. I'll create a world where wars no longer exist." Han had been taken aback. "You'll create it?" 15 days later, the massive structure known as Terranode rose from the sea, signaling the start of ARC and Citadel's first joint operation. Psykers from both sides boarded together. Some embraced old comrades in reunion, but many exchanged cold, wary glares, tension heavy in the air. On the command deck, John asked Octo, "What's the condition of Citadel's psycho frames?" Octo adjusted his glasses. "For tech lacking the core system, they've maintained it surprisingly well. But once they have the core blueprints, they'll accelerate their own research." John nodded grimly. "The US finally agreed to provide the core too. Their logic is simple: we strike before Citadel mass produces. In anti-dragon power we're matched, but in anti-personnel combat, we still hold the edge." Octo looked up. "Who's carrying Silver's spear?" John replied. "Knut Meyer. Among the enhanced soldiers, his sync rate is the highest." Surprised, Octo asked. Not giving it to Li Han? John shook his head. Even Tobias agreed with me on that. Han's AP wave is our final trump card. He's the only one who might control Kuro if he goes out of control. We can't throw that kind of asset into the front lines recklessly. Plus, the man's not just a soldier, he's got the makings of a commander. Meanwhile, Han, commanding this joint mission from the operations deck, looked down over a tactical map and thought, we'll bait them in by moving into a dragon emergence zone ourselves. Humanity has already taken down 3 hive-level dragons. 4 remain. One of them is Silver. I don't expect to find him first, but eliminating even one would be enough. Elsewhere on Terranode, in the Citadel officers' quarters, Omega-1's voice rang out in disbelief. What? What did you just say, Kuro? Kuro stood in the middle of the room, calm and resolute. I said I'll take the front. I'm going to lead the charge. This is my chance to show everyone. Omega-1 clenched his fists. Damn it, he's already beyond persuasion. Kuro turned to one of the Citadel's psykers standing nearby and ordered. Prep my psycho frame. The soldier saluted immediately. Yes, sir. As Kuro unfastened his collar, a sharp gleam entered his eyes. I'll show them. Right here. Right now. No war happens without my permission. Sometime later, a Terranode-class submarine, previously submerged beneath the waves, surged to the ocean's surface with tremendous speed. The massive war vessel tore through the water like a beast awakened, leaving white foam and turbulence in its wake. On the forward deck of the submarine stood Kuro, clad in his shimmering psychic frame, radiating power. With the wind whipping around him and the ocean reflecting the gold and deep violet of his armor, he stood tall, commanding and regal, like a sovereign surveying his domain. Inside the command room, a feed of the deck was displayed on the monitor. Colonel Tobias, watching Kuro in silence, scoffed and muttered, Gold and purple, does he think he's some kind of emperor? Nearby, Han opened a calm line and spoke to Kuro directly. We're almost at the dragon sighting zone. Are you really going in alone? Kuro answered calmly, without hesitation. No problem, Han. Just then, the skies above darkened ominously. Thunderclouds rolled in like smoke, and streaks of purple lightning flickered across the heavens. Kuro turned his head upward, his expression sharpening. In the next instant, several dragons burst forth from the clouds, hurtling toward him with terrifying speed and fury. Unshaken, Kuro lifted one arm as if drawing a bowstring from thin air. Psychic energy gathered at his fingertips, raw and brilliant. In an instant, he materialized a glowing bow and arrow formed entirely from psychic force and loosed it toward the incoming threats. The projectile streaked through the air like a comet and struck true, obliterating multiple dragons in a single blast. In the command room, stunned silence hung for a moment before Tobias spoke, breathless. Oh my God! What did I just see? He took down a dragon, with pure psychic power. Han, equally astonished, added. And from long range, no less. But I doubt that's the limit of what Kuro can do. Back on the deck, Kuro narrowed his eyes at the remnants of the dragon horde and muttered under his breath. I don't even need to aim anymore. Just the intent to strike is enough. That's what you lack, imagination. I'm a superior psychic. You can't match me. Bring your leader. With that, he conjured more psychic arrows and began firing in rapid succession, cutting through the sky with lethal precision. Dragons fell one after another, slain before they could even close the distance. Far above, one of the dragons, before dying, used its psychic abilities to transmit what it saw to the hive leader, who sat motionless atop a nest built into the edge of a boiling magma crater. The hive leader opened his ancient eyes and narrowed them at the vision, a human, clad in light, single-handedly slaying his kin. A human? Again. But this one, he's different. The dragon's voice in his mind was weary, but curious. Then, with a violent eruption of molten rock and fire, the dragon hive leader launched into the sky like a missile, breaking through the stratosphere, ascending until he hung in the void of outer space. There, above the earth, he began charging his breath attack, a condensed cataclysm capable of destroying entire fleets. Back on the Terranode, Kuro suddenly tensed, sensing a presence. He turned to the command center's monitor feed and said evenly, A hive-class dragon has arrived. Tobias's eyes widened in disbelief. What? Are you serious? Han responded. But it's not showing up on radar. Did you see it with short-term foresight? Kuro shook his head. No. But I can feel it. That's all I need. He raised his hand slowly toward the sky, palm open as though reaching for something invisible. If you can sense it, you can aim at it. That's true for both of us. Meanwhile, high above, the dragon hive leader completed its charge. Celestial fire gathered in its maw, ready to rain destruction upon the lone psyker. But before it could unleash its attack, an enormous psychic hand materialized beside it, Kuro's construct, grabbing the hive leader mid-flight, causing the dragon to jolt in surprise and misfire its breath into the void. On the submarine deck, blood began trickling down from Kuro's nose, the exertion pushing his body to its limit. From the monitor room, Tobias watched Kuro with concern. "What's he doing now?" Han didn't answer right away. Before he could, the readings spiked. Kuro's body began to rise off the ground, levitating, surrounded by an aura of overwhelming psychic force. "This," Han muttered. "This is an enormous release of power." Tobias stared, stunned. "He's floating, like a spirit. If this were the Middle Ages, people would swear an angel had descended." Above Earth, trapped in the crushing grip of Kuro's power, the hive-class dragon snarled and cursed. "How dare you! You wretched low-born creature!" But Kuro didn't flinch. He clenched his hand in the air, and the psychic construct pulled the dragon downward, wrenching it from outer space and dragging it toward the ocean. As the hive leader plummeted, his thoughts ran wild. We weren't like this once. We ruled with order, with balance. We were worshipped as gods, not gentle, but not monsters. Then the humans came, and we fell to rage. To madness. They broke us. If only they were gone, maybe we could return to what we once were. A few seconds later, the dragon's body slammed into the sea near the Terranode, hitting the water with the force of a meteorite. The impact triggered a massive explosion, geysers of water shooting into the air, and a deafening boom echoing across the ocean. The sea burned with light, and the sky, for a moment, stood still. A massive shockwave erupted as the hive-class dragon crashed into the sea, sending a colossal wall of water roaring outward. The resulting waves slammed into the side of the Terranode-class submarine, rocking the entire vessel with brutal force. Inside, the crew staggered, some thrown off their feet entirely, crashing into walls, consoles, and one another as the floor pitched beneath them. In the Octolab, deep within the submarine, Dimitri and Derek, both inside their psychic frames, felt the entire chamber quake. Dimitri cursed, gripping a rail for balance. "Damn it, what the hell was that?" Outside on the deck, Kuro, eyes still glowing with power, immediately reacted. With a simple gesture, he extended his psychic force in every direction, acting as an invisible stabilizer. The violent rocking stilled. "Sorry," Kuro said calmly over the comms. "That was my mistake. I dropped it, way closer than I meant to." Then, switching to a commanding tone, he added, "Han, I'm going to freeze the sea. Deploy the enhanced soldiers in ground combat mode." Suddenly, the surface of the ocean around the impact site began to solidify, spreading outward in a gleaming wave of crystalline ice. It crackled and expanded in all directions, freezing the waters in an instant. At the center of the frozen battlefield, the hive leader dragged himself out of the sea, coughing steam and blood. His body smoldered from the impact, but his voice remained laced with venom. "You humans, if only you bastards would vanish!" Without warning, a unit of enhanced soldiers wearing sleek psychic frames launched from the submarine's exit hatches. They sprinted across the frozen ocean surface with unnatural speed, racing toward the recovering dragon. Among them was Dimitri, leading the charge. As he ran, his eyes widened in awe. "There was a time I never imagined this, running across the ocean. And now look at us." He glanced at his companion. "Kuro's power is real. We can win this." Sensing their approach, the dragon snarled and spread his wings in preparation to escape, but the soldiers were faster. Two of them leapt high, slashing down with precision. With a sickening crack and a burst of black blood, the dragon's wings were severed, sending him crashing back down onto the frozen sea. But the beast refused to yield. Hovering into the air using psychic energy alone, the dragon roared in defiance. "You filthy humans think you understand the depths of our domain?" He turned his burning gaze toward Kuro. "What are you?" As the hive leader focused on Kuro, he left himself open for a moment. Derek and Dimitri seized the opportunity, activating their frame-enhanced weaponry and lunging toward him. Their combined assault landed cleanly, but when they struck the dragon's body, the weapons glanced off without leaving so much as a scratch. The dragon retaliated instantly, unleashing a shockwave of psychic force. Both soldiers were thrown back like ragdolls, crashing into the ice and skidding across its surface. Watching from the monitor room, Han clenched his fists. As I thought, attacks from the outside won't work. His eyes narrowed. We need to hit it from within, but that won't work now either. He turned from the screen, unfastening the top of his uniform. It already knows. It's not opening its mouth at all. The shared consciousness tipped it off. He activated his calm. Kuro. I'll go. There was a beat of silence. What did you say? Kuro asked sharply. I'll try to disable its psychic shield with an AP wave. I just need to get within 50 meters. Han paused, thinking to himself, I have no idea if this will work against the Hive-class barrier, but it's something we have to try. Kuro's voice came back tense. No way. Are you insane? You're going in there with no protection? His tone hardened. You don't have to do this. I'll handle it. Before Han could respond again, Kuro raised his arms and released an immense surge of psychic energy, bright enough to momentarily turn the entire sky white. The dragon, sensing the overwhelming force, growled in disbelief. This can't be happening. Two massive psychic hands materialized in the air, shaped by Kuro's will. They pressed against the invisible barrier protecting the dragon, its psychic shield, and began to apply crushing pressure. The shield resisted, shimmering and warping, but Kuro didn't relent. He poured more energy into the constructs, his eyes burning, his frame crackling with strain. The hands continued pressing. Cracks formed. Then, with a final push, the shield shattered, and the dragon's heart, a glowing, pulsating core of dark energy, was exposed. From the side, Canute, already poised in a stance, launched forward. With impeccable timing and precision, he closed the distance and struck, his weapon piercing directly into the exposed heart. The dragon convulsed, psychic energy exploding outward as its body began to dissolve into light and ash. Its voice, faint but resolute, echoed in Kuro's mind as it faded. I'll deal with you next time, human. Kuro stood motionless on the icy battlefield, his golden and violet frame glinting in the fractured light. He watched in silence as the last remnants of the Hive-class dragon vanished into the wind. The scene transitioned to Bahamut, the crimson behemoth of psychic wrath, who was still recovering from his earlier clash with the enhanced soldiers. Though his body was bruised, his mind was active, connected through the shared psychic network of the Hive, now flooded with the dying memories of the golden dragon who had just fallen. His eyes flared as he muttered, "Desire form, eliminated." A low growl rumbled in his throat as a wave of discomfort surged through him. No matter how many times I witness it, it's still disgusting. They've grown again. Stronger. Faster. Evolving without end. His massive claws curled in frustration. We can't stay as we are. We must change too, become faster, stronger, smarter. Next, we need a greater form. A power that can extinguish all humans. A body worthy of our wrath. Elsewhere, Kuro sat in stillness, cultivating his psychic energy within the chamber of the Terranode-class submarine. Hours seemed to pass until his eyes opened, only to find himself no longer where he had been. He was in a strange, ethereal dimension, surrounded on all sides by an interwoven net of glowing psychic threads, pulsing like veins of pure thought. Where am I? Kuro wondered, rising slowly to his feet. Could this place be tied to the origin of psychic power itself? As he walked further in, the atmosphere thickened. A dreadful pressure descended. Up ahead loomed a mass of pitch-black energy, pulsing with dark radiance, immense and suffocating. It wasn't just power. It was presence. Kuro staggered, clutching his head. His breathing quickened. His knees buckled. Then, in a flash, he was pulled back. His eyes shot open in the real world as he collapsed to the ground, panting, drenched in sweat. What was that place? He thought, still shaken. It felt forbidden. Something I should never touch. He narrowed his eyes. Someone in Ark must know something. Someone has to understand what that was. The scene shifted again, this time to Han, standing outside a room. He knocked gently. A voice called out from within. Come in. Han entered. Seated at a modest dining table with 2 sets of plates was Colonel Tobias, deputy commander of Ark's forces. Tobias waved a hand casually. No need for formality between us. Sit. Han closed the door and raised a brow. A private meal? You're being pretty transparent. You know I'll keep my promise either way. Tobias shrugged. That's just how it has to be for now. Go on, eat. As the two began their quiet meal, Tobias broke the silence. Just hypothetically, If something ever goes wrong, Lieutenant Han, what are the odds you could restrain Kuro? Han paused, his glass halfway to his lips. He slowly set it back down. Odds? He gave a faint smile. I'm just an ant, with venom that might kill an elephant, if I'm lucky. But the gap might be wider than even that. Tobias didn't respond at first, but his silence betrayed concern. Finally, he said, I put in a request to HQ for your psycho frame. They'll build it with the best tech we've got. Everything on the table. Han replied flatly. If it's got a nuclear core, I'll pass. Tobias gave a dry chuckle. That project's dead. Scrapped months ago. Han nodded slowly. I get it. You're worried. But Kuro isn't a supremacist. He's not obsessed with being above others. His thoughts lingered. I have to believe in him. If I don't, he might really fall apart. Han stood, placing his utensils down. Thanks for the meal. I'll be going now. The scene shifted again, this time to John's office, where the commanding officer sat across from Kuro, visibly uneasy. What did you just say? John asked, tension rising in his voice. I want to meet it. Kuro repeated calmly. The devil. John straightened in his seat. Even if I say no, will you force your way through? I have no ill intentions, Kuro replied. I just want to understand this power, to learn how to use it properly. I need to be in control of it. John fell silent, eyes narrowing as he studied the young psychic. After a long pause, he sighed. Fine. But it'll be under my supervision. No objections, right? None, Sergeant. Some time later, Kuro and John arrived at a high-security chamber. A narrow hallway led to a thick pane of bulletproof glass, behind which sat a pale, motionless man in a metal chair. Jürgen Teller, once a scientist, now a psionic entity known only as the Devil. Kuro stopped in front of the glass. The air seemed to darken just from being near it. I heard about him, Kuro said under his breath. But seeing it in person, it doesn't sit right. Jürgen slowly looked up, a crooked smile forming on his gaunt face. Feeling sorry for Jürgen Teller? Don't. You might become him. When the dragons are gone, who do you think the humans will turn on next? You talk too much, Kuro replied. I'm the one asking questions today. He stepped forward. I have a psychic core, power equal to a dragon's. What lies at the end of this ability? The devil leaned forward. Even I don't know. Kuro frowned. How disappointing. Devil is too grand a title for someone who knows nothing. Jürgen stood now, placing his hands slowly on the glass. Want a better answer? Then show me what you've seen. He extended his palm. Place your hand here. Connect with me. Share the vision, and I'll give you the truth. John tensed. Kuro, don't. But Kuro stepped forward. It's fine, he said calmly. I'm not the kind of person who loses himself to someone like him. Without hesitation, he pressed his hand to the glass opposite Jürgen's. Their psychic energies surged into each other, clashing, entwining, and with a sudden, deafening crack, the bulletproof glass exploded into shards, blown apart by the sheer force of their psychic link.
We got plenty more where that came from. Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for even more amazing content.